And welcome to Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com, the mobile app, as well as YouTube. He's Matt Citak. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Multiple ways you'd interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You could also hit us up on Twitter, hashtag GiantsChat. He's at Matt Citak, one word. I'm at Lance Medow, one word. Last name, Medow. It's a little bit easier to spell Citak, so that's why I don't give you the trouble from that perspective. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. As we welcome you into the Giants podcast studio, it is presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. So, Matt, less than 24 hours, we'll have preseason game number 1 in Buffalo, Giants-Bills. So we'll spend today's show talking about some of the things to hone in on, to look out for. And obviously, we welcome your calls as well as your YouTube comments. Clearly, the team did not practice. They're en route to Western New York, so there's no updates on that front. We heard from Jackson Dart and Abdul Carter yesterday. Paul and I spoke a little bit about that. But let's start with Dart, because Brian Daboll did confirm he's going to play, which is not a stunning development. And I thought Dart did a nice job really delving into what he wants out of this performance and whether or not there's an overwhelming amount of pressure. And I think preseason games, just from a big picture perspective, tend to be blown out of proportion. So, right, I think we all need to take a step back. We're all anxious to see what he could do. But at the same time, Rome was not built in a day, and you also did not build a pathway to Canton, Ohio in one preseason game or half a contest. But I think what you're looking at of Dart in tomorrow's game, Matt, is he comfortable? Can he run the offense? Can he get in and out of the huddle? It's not so much the wow me plays, it's can he take command of the offense when he's in, and does it run relatively smoothly?
Yeah, so we heard from the Giants coordinators a couple days ago. I believe it was Wednesday. And Mike Kafka was asked straight up, what do you want to see from Jackson Dart in his first NFL game on Saturday? And Kafka said what you just said. I want to see him run the offense and run it, efficiently. He didn't say I need him to, blow the doors off of the Bills defense, throw 3 touchdown passes. He said, I want him to play his game. I want him to feel comfortable out there and play like his normal aggressive nature. That's what I want to see. And then when Jackson spoke yesterday, he reiterated the same exact message. He said, my focus is on being prepared. I want to run the offense how the coaching staff wants me to do it, while also, adding in a little bit of my own flavor to it. Sure. Which he said the coaching staff encourages him to do. And the thing that really stood out to me the most was Jackson acknowledged, he's like, look, it's not going to be perfect. I am going to make mistakes on Saturday. And he said, I'm going to make mistakes probably every time I go to the field. And that's okay. The point of this game, the focus, the goal is to just get more comfortable running this Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka offense. And he seems to be very focused on that, and which is the great mindset to have, because again, it's the preseason. Like, obviously we would love to see the Giants win. We'd love to see everyone play well. At the end of the day, whoever wins or loses this game, it's not going on to the record for the season at the end of the day.
And there's no preseason bowl or anything that you're competing for.
Exactly. All we want is this, especially this first game where so many guys are going to be making their Giants debuts, even veteran players. Obviously, we may not end up seeing every single player on the roster, but, for example, a guy like Montrell Washington, who's been around for a couple of years, has had a very strong summer.
Sure.
This will be his Giants debut. This is the first time running the offense and the defense for a lot of different players on the team. And the biggest goal, I think, coming out of tomorrow's game is to just see these guys, feel comfortable in both the offense and defensive systems, these new systems for so many guys. That's got to be the number one goal. And it sure, from what everyone's saying, it sure sounds like that is what just about everyone is focused on.
And also see what they could do against an unfamiliar opponent that they're not going up against on a daily basis. And this is why when coaches are peppered with the same questions over and over again about, well, when you break down, it's similar to when you're in college, right? You get the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, Matt, and they tell you how your grade is composed. And it says the midterm counts for X amount of points and so forth. Well, coaches are always asked, is it the practice or is it the preseason games? And Brian Daboll mentioned a few days ago, listen, it's hard to simulate game speed in practice. You don't tackle to the ground. So flat out, these preseason games are much more important, I think, in telling what a player can do long run, even if they wow you and are consistent in the film room and on the practice field. So I'm glad you brought up a guy like Montrell Washington, who I think has made a very strong impression during practices. And he's built a nice rapport with Jackson Dart. There was a recent practice where Dart threaded the needle over the middle, and Washington was right there to haul it in and took it to the house. So can they now duplicate that success? And Washington's probably going to work with multiple quarterbacks because he's a veteran. He's been in the league. He's been with a few teams, including the Denver Broncos. And there could be a 6th spot opened here in this receiving corps. So tomorrow's game, as well as the next 2, could go a long way in not just determining whether or not an individual is going to get a roster spot, but, Matt, whether the coaching staff says, we want to keep a 6th wide receiver as opposed to just settle for 5.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I know everyone's, main focus is on Jackson Dart, and I understand why, but obviously tomorrow's game and the following 2 games, they're going to go a long way in determining, the future for nearly half of the guys on the current roster. Right now, that's 90 guys on the roster. Obviously, only 53 make it to the active roster, and then obviously you get practice squad as well. But these 3 preseason games, and I will add the 2 joint practices with the Jets next week as well, because those reps during team drills, one-on-one drills, that'll be the closest that all these guys get outside of the 3 preseason games to real game reps. Because I mean, you've seen the joint practices the last couple of years. Guys are going 110% during those, just because it's not that they don't do that normally on an everyday basis during training camp, but when you're going up against a guy in another uniform for, at that point it'll be the 2nd time all year, guys are fired up and they want to really showcase their
different
success.
Intensity, different feel.
For sure. So that is an extra opportunity for all of these guys fighting for their NFL futures, their NFL lives, to make a lasting impression on the coaching staff. And just going back to Jackson for 1 second, it does have, I would say, maybe a little bit more importance for him than some of the other rookies and young players, for the simple fact that, as we all know, Brian Daboll has made it very abundantly clear that Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback. And with Jameis Winston also here, these next 3 games might be the last 3 chances we get to see Jackson Dart in a game setting for a long time. In an ideal world, it's the last 3 games he plays all year other than mop-up duty. Obviously, things will have to be going very well for that to happen, and we would all love for that to happen. But even if it doesn't, there is a very good chance that we don't get to see Jackson Dart in a game setting again after that Patriots last preseason game for a couple of months. So, and he spoke about it yesterday, about how valuable these reps are going to be in the preseason because of that. He's aware of the situation. He's not oblivious. He knows he's not likely taking the field for a while in a regular season game. And so that is why starting tomorrow and the 2 preseason games after that are going to be so important for him to, show what he can do for the coaching staff, but just for him to learn and get those actual game reps that are going to help him grow and develop early on in his career.
Well, you bring up a great point. Really, it could be mental reps after the preseason for the duration of the season. He, granted, may play the scout team here or there, depending on how they orchestrate practices, but once again, very different than being in a game. It's funny, it reminded me when Abdul Carter spoke to the media on Thursday, he mentioned, boy, this is my first game in like 6 months, right? Because even he hasn't played in quite some time. So you can imagine if Dart has to go the entire year. And once again, I don't think that's going to stunt his growth or be bad for his development, but when you take that into consideration, Matt, that's also another reason why it's important for Dart to stay even keel. Because if he says to himself, man, these 3 games, that's it. And then I could very well, because you have to operate with, I could very well not get into an NFL game during the regular season. You don't want to go above and beyond to try to once again wow everybody and go for the show me play. I think, and he has the mindset, it seems, that he's not putting that all on himself and all on his shoulders. But we've seen rookies, they get on the field, the butterflies, they're thinking about what could be coming, what may not be on the horizon, and you just try to do too much. So I think that's also important for Dart, to not think so much big picture and just handle this as if, hey, this is the next game on the schedule. Maybe I play 2 more games. Maybe I play 4. Who knows? But don't think about that too much.
Yeah, and that's why I think it is actually very beneficial for him that Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston are here. It takes away all of that pressure. I mean, normally when a quarterback gets taken in the first round of the NFL draft, even if the team has a veteran already under contract there, the buzz starts very early of, you got to get the rookie on the field. You got to get out there immediately, week 1 or whatever. That's not going to happen now. I mean, barring multiple injuries, that is just not going to happen for the Giants and Jackson Dart, which is a good thing. I mean, I know it's kind of veering off of what most of the NFL, the trendy thing to do in the NFL, but you look back at, Patrick Mahomes sat his entire rookie year until the last game of the season. Again, I'm not saying he's the next Patrick Mahomes, but
sure,
that is obviously just an example of someone that got to sit for basically an entire year. And then when he finally did come in, has obviously been the best quarterback in the NFL ever since. So I think having those 2 veterans here, obviously from a learning perspective, is so beneficial, but it just takes all the pressure off of him. He can just go out there on Saturday in the next 2 weeks, just play his game. And even if he lights the Bills on fire tomorrow, he's still not going to start week 1.
No, it doesn't change the conversation at all.
Yeah, so I think, and Jackson was kind of saying this yesterday, that he's not really thinking about, this might be my last 3 games for a while. He said, look, I'm preparing every week as if I'm going to play. And I think he clearly knows that the likely will not be the case, but he's got everything he's saying to the media seems like he has the perfect mindset and mentality for the Giants' current quarterback situation. He knows that, hopefully he is the future of this franchise in terms of the quarterback position, but there's no rush. Russell Wilson is here. Russell Wilson's looked very good this summer. Jameis Winston is a proven veteran that's been doing it for a decade now. He knows that those 2 guys are going to get, the first few cracks at it at the quarterback position, and he seems to be perfectly fine with that. And I think that is going to be very good for both him and the Giants long term.
Just to piggyback off of your point, I always go to this chart that CBS Sports built a few years back, and they give you a nice layout of the land of when quarterbacks started who were relatively high picks or quarterbacks that actually made something of their careers. So here's names that did not play at all in their first year in the NFL, because it goes beyond even Mahomes, who got in, as you mentioned, that final week, only because, by the way, the Chiefs had locked up a playoff spot and there was nothing they could gain. If they had something to play for, Alex Smith is under center that last week of the season. So even factors like that have to align. Carson Palmer did not start until year 2. Then you look at Michael Vick, didn't start until year 2. Drew Brees sat because you had Doug Flutie. Everybody talks about Phillip Rivers, who I'm now going to get to in year 3, but when Brees came, Doug Flutie was there. Chad Pennington, who had a respectable career. Tony Romo, also year 3. Year 4, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo. And I'm not picking on you for bringing up Mahomes. It's just everybody turns to Mahomes. Mahomes would be maybe the 7th or 8th guy I would mention. There's so many other good substantive examples who waited a hell of a lot longer than Mahomes, Matt, till they got in. So this idea, whether you're a high first rounder or a late first rounder, that you've got to get on the field and play immediately, to me, and I'm not saying that I'm giving you a huge sample size. I get it. The NFL's been around for a relatively long time, but there's enough names there where you can't say it's impacted the outlook of their careers by sitting a little, especially when you have polished veterans on the team sharing the room with you. And that's what's important to note with Dart. It's a good environment. It's a healthy quarterback room. He has 2 guys that are not worried about their job security because they understand what the contract looks like. So it's not as if they're looking at, oh, we want to keep Dart away from the job because we're worried that he's going to take it from us. I think they're supportive. That doesn't mean that they're not working hard, but there's this common ground between them helping Dart and at the same time taking care of the task at hand.
Yeah, and Jackson also noted that, touched on that subject yesterday as well, where he spoke about it, and he said, we have a incredibly tight quarterback room. And he even said it was unique. Obviously, this is the only quarterback room in the NFL that Jackson Dart has been a part of. But clearly there is a very tight connection between all four guys. I know we always kind of brush over Tommy DeVito, sure, but Tommy DeVito is probably the quarterback that Jackson Dart is closest with right now. And also, let's not forget the longest tenured quarterback in that room in the Giants system. But yeah, all four of those guys are incredibly tight. They are all helping each other. Yes, Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston are trying to and Tommy DeVito are guiding Jackson through his first rookie training camp, but it is a two-way road, or I should say a four-way road, a four-way intersection. They are all helping each other in every single possible way. All four of them, all they want to do is help this team win. They don't care which guy is out there. Jackson said that yesterday. Russell Wilson has said that in the past. Jameis has as well. They don't care who's out there. All of them are just focused on doing whatever it takes to help the 2025 New York Giants win football games. And that's obviously the mindset you want everyone to have on the entire roster. That's only a good thing. And in terms of what you were saying about all those different quarterbacks, I can't remember one situation where a team after a quarter or, down the road or after a quarterback's first year was like, wow, we really regret, sitting him till week 8. We should have put him in sooner. You don't really hear that. All the time, almost every single year, you hear teams say, you know what? We probably threw the quarterback in a little too early. He wasn't ready for it. We wanted to see what he had, threw him in too early. And it ends up hurting that quarterback's development when you throw him out too early and he's not ready. So I think it is a great situation for Jackson to sit back, kind of sit behind the scenes once the season starts, soak up as much information as he can from two, again, proven NFL veterans, the guys that have been doing it at a high level for a very long time. I mean, Jackson's spoken about how he literally looked up to Russell Wilson growing up, and now they're sharing a quarterback room together.
Well, do the math. I mean, Russ has been in the league since 2012.
I know, and
so Dart makes him feel old.
And Jackson's only 22 years old. Yep. So Russell Wilson was one of the quarterbacks he was looking up to and, modeling his game after in some way as he was growing up playing the game of football. So, yeah, there's no rush to get Jackson in. Let him take as many reps as possible during the preseason, because on the flip side, there's not so much we really need to see from Russell Wilson in the preseason. No, I want to see him get out there, a little bit, because obviously it's him running a new system. So you don't want him coming out week 1 having taken 0 actual game reps in Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka's system. But at the same time, he is a 10-time Pro Bowl quarterback that's been doing this for a very long time. He doesn't need to get his feet wet too much, I would say, in the preseason. Let him get a little taste, and then after that, let Jameis get a taste, and then let Jackson Dart really get a lot of reps, because as we said, 3 weeks from now, he could be sitting on the bench for a long time, at least in terms of game days.
You bring up an interesting point. I did not look this up, and now I'm going to look it up. I know he was dealing with the injury in the preseason last year. That's why Justin Fields started the season.
Yep.
I don't know. Do you know how much he played at all with the Broncos during that preseason?
During the preseason?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to get an idea, because the more and more I'm thinking about it is, I'm with you. I don't think it hurts for him to get some reps because it's, again, a new system. But when you think about it, this is the 3rd time in 3 years that Russell Wilson is learning a new system, right?
Yep.
Because he was with Seattle, then Denver, Pittsburgh, the Giants. So I guess I was looking at how much Sean Payton said to himself, and Sean's been working with a lot of quarterbacks over his career, hey, Russ, get some work in. So I'm going to bring that up and see whether or not we can just get an idea of how much he played to maybe further the conversation. And we'll circle back to that. And by the way, 201-939-4513 is the telephone number, as well as navigating your questions on YouTube, focusing on the preseason game. Players to watch. Who are you most invested in and interested in? Matt and I are focusing on the quarterbacks, but as he said, Dart is the main event. Doesn't mean it's the only attraction in terms of Saturday's game. So Russell Wilson was with Denver in 2023 because he was with Pittsburgh last year. So I'm bringing up the Broncos preseason. So he was in the first preseason game because I'm looking at the highest passer. He threw for 93 yards in that game. So that was against the Arizona Cardinals. Let's just look. Yeah, he was 7 of 13 for 93 yards and a touchdown. So, I mean, he played probably a good portion of the early stages of the game. I'm bringing up the game log. That's the beauty of technology. Can you imagine us doing the show in 1975, not to date anyone, or 1985? Would not have been fun in terms of trying to get through all of this information. So he was in the second drive. He was in the third drive of the game. Let's go for maybe a fourth drive. He was in the fourth drive of the game, and that was their first score. Did he play number 5? No, Jarrett Stidham came in. So Sean used him for the first 4 possessions of that very first Broncos preseason game. And the reason, Matt, that I'm bringing it up is, if you recall, Brian Daboll was asked, do you tweak things year to year? And he said, I look at what other coaches have done with similar players. So did Brian look at what Sean did? Because I'm sure he respects Sean from being in the league, and say, well, Peyton played Russ for 4 series. And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but just something to keep in the back of everyone's mind as we gear up for this first preseason game.
Yeah, and I do think it relates because that was also Sean Payton's first season as the Broncos head coach.
Sure, he was taking everything was new across the board. Yeah,
obviously Russ spent 2 years in Denver. They were 2 very, very different years, 2 very different offensive systems that he was running. So that is why I do think it is, it makes sense to sort of look at that second preseason when Sean Payton took over, because it was, Russ learning a new system, a system that he had never played in before. I think Daboll will probably, I'm sure Russ has already said that he would love to go out there and play. Obviously, it's not going to end up coming down to his decision.
Only so much influence.
But Coach Daboll did say, look, obviously the last 2 seasons, we did not start off strong in the regular season. And so Coach said, I'm going to look at what we did the last 2 preseasons and then how we started, and somewhat factor that into the decision on who plays tomorrow. So, look, we're less than 24 hours out. I still have no idea if Russell Wilson's going to play or not tomorrow. We have not heard anything. I think there's a chance he could play for the very reason that you just, brought up with Sean Payton in his first year in Denver. I would say there are some other players, some, veteran players, the guys that you kind of would consider the star players of the team, that chances are, if I had to guess, will not be suiting up tomorrow. And, I'm talking about like the Malik Neighbors and Dexter Lawrence's, Brian Burns's of the team. But someone like Russ, there is obviously a benefit for letting him go out there, even if it's just for 1 or 2 drives, just to get his feet a little wet in this new system. Because, again, like we said before, it's one thing to do it in practice, and he's looked good in practice. It's a totally another beast doing it in a game against another defense who's not only fully trying to stop you, but also fully trying to hit you. Because Russell Wilson has not gotten hit, obviously, since the end of last season, since the end of the Steelers postseason run, because there's no hitting, obviously, during the preseason. So for multitude of reasons, there is a reason to put him out there. And we will see him in the preseason. I just don't know if it will necessarily be tomorrow or maybe next week.
I looked up the rest of the preseason games for Denver in 2023. He played 1 series in the second game and did not play at all in the third. So the bulk of the work, really all of the work, came in that first preseason game. Just once again, a means of comparison. But you hit on something that Greg Van Roden brought up. Van Roden, who's worked with a variety of quarterbacks, was asked, what's the difference in blocking for Russell Wilson? And this is where I do think it would help for him to play a little, because since he loves to extend plays so much, Matt, and the fact that you can't hit the quarterback, there's a lot of plays that could be a sack, but they don't go down as that in practice. I think for the sake of the timing of the offensive lineman, it would help to have an experience in a game setting. Okay, the internal clock, Russ likes to circle around. How much more do you have to be engaged in your blocking as opposed to it being more of a rude awakening in week 1 of the regular season? So from that standpoint, I guess what I'm saying is maybe it's not so important that Russell Wilson gets a hit, but the offensive linemen work out the timing in their head, because it's a lot different blocking for him than Jameis Winston, Jackson Dart, and any of the previous Giants quarterbacks that have been here.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right with that. One thing I would say is we know Coach Dable did not tell us who is not playing tomorrow in terms of injuries.
Close to the vest, he kept everything.
Yes.
Very close to the
Real
vest.
shocker coming from Coach Dable, I know. But the one thing we do know is that Andrew Thomas will not play because he is still on the physically unable to perform list. You are not allowed to play in a preseason game while you're still on the PUP list. So him and Eric Gray, we know for sure they will not be playing. Andrew Thomas obviously...
Should have said spoiler alert, by the way. But yes, go ahead.
Andrew Thomas obviously he's the linchpin of the offensive line. He is, if that unit is going to have success this year, it's going to start with him, I will say, just being on the field. Because when he is on the field healthy, I don't think any of us have any sort of doubts on his ability and what he can do out there. It's just a matter of getting him out there healthy that obviously will play a very big part. So I do, and that's point being, because right now we know he is not, at least healthy enough to play tomorrow, it is very important, I think, for the rest of the offensive line to get those game reps because, there could be a situation where during the season, even if Andrew Thomas comes back for week 1 and is healthy, just based on how the last 2 years have gone, there's a chance he gets hurt again. Or if not him, maybe Jermaine Illuminor on the right side. And if that happens, you want James Hudson, who is going to be your swing tackle and your backup in case either one of those starting tackles gets hurt. You want him being as game ready as possible and game ready with the rest of the starting offensive line. Because as we all know, continuity up front is the most important thing. Having as many reps together as possible is very, very beneficial for those guys. So, yeah, getting James Hudson as many reps as possible with, the John Runyons, the Greg Van Rodens, JMSs, like that is going to be very, very valuable. Obviously, hopefully James Hudson does not have a single start this year because that means Andrew Thomas and Jermaine Illuminor are healthy. But just given the way, the league is now and how offensive linemen get hurt, there's a decent chance that James Hudson's going to have to fill in at some point this year. So getting him as game ready as possible with the rest of the starting offensive line is, I agree with you, is just as important as Russell Wilson getting out there, getting reps with the rest of the starting offense.
Yeah, it's hard to go into a season believing that all 5 offensive linemen are going to play all 17 games. It's just not reality, and it would be naive. So even though you don't want necessarily James Hudson, I think the reality is there's a good chance, whether it's in the midst of a game or starting a game, that he's going to see action, and the swing tackle is extremely important. Speaking of the offensive line, we're getting some questions coming in on YouTube, so let's stay on topic, Matt, and address a few of these. Avery asks, will Thomas play, which we just answered, obviously, that's a no, or Neal? The offensive line, to me, is arguably the most important piece of this team. There needs to be cohesion, and I think he's echoing the sentiments that we have voiced. Before we answer that, just another question related to Evan Neal, and we can sandwich it together. Interesting perspective here. Cornell, what would be more impactful in the long run? Evan Neal proving to be a solid starting guard and winning the starting job at right guard, or Banks further improving and winning the quarterback 2 job over Cordell Flott? So let's start with Evan Neal first. Neal is in a completely different position than Thomas, first of all. Neal is healthy, that's number 1, and he's not on the PUP, and Neal is fighting for a starting position. So what is at stake? And the value of seeing him in the preseason, Matt, completely different than Andrew Thomas. So I would expect to see Evan Neal, especially since I know he's had experience previously at guard, but he hasn't played that in some time. I would expect to see him throughout the preseason and especially in the joint practices.
Yeah, the preseason is going to be so significant for Evan Neal because obviously, we've had these reports. We've seen it ourselves dating back to the spring where he's been lining up at guard and, he's looked good, but you can't compare doing it in practice, even with contact allowed, compared to a game. It's just 2 different ballparks. So the preseason is going to be so vitally important for Evan Neal to show the coaching staff what he can do after transitioning inside. I mean, again, he's looked good. There have been multiple times where I've turned to, Dan Salomon on the sideline being like, did you just see Evan Neal move the offensive lineman like 10 yards downfield? He's had plays like that. But again, he's got to do it in a game. He has not played on the inside since his freshman year at Alabama back in 2019. That's 6 years ago at this point. That's a long time. And obviously the last 3 years have not been great from him. That's why, they're trying moving him on the inside. So to answer the question, I think it will definitely, long-term would definitely be more beneficial if Evan Neal stood out in the next few weeks in these preseason games and won the starting guard spot over Greg Van Roden, because right now Greg Van Roden is clearly the favorite to win that job.
And rightfully so, because he has more experience there.
More experience. Yeah. He was played every single snap last year, was very solid. And Paul and I have discussed this before, we kind of know what we're getting out of Greg Van Roden. It's solid play, but the upside is not quite the same, or the potential is not quite the same as what the upside and potential could be for Evan Neal on the inside, given, he's 10 years younger and just bigger and more athletic. So,
and in terms of value of where he was drafted to, that I think you got to take into consideration.
And obviously the depth chart is unofficial, but on that first depth chart, Greg Van Roden was listed as the starter. So if Evan Neal played so well that the coaching staff was like, you know what, we can't have this guy starting week 1 on the bench. He needs to be the starting right guard. That would obviously be great for the offensive line, because it also then gives you Greg Van Roden, who could be your primary backup at all 3 spots on the interior, which would make me feel very comfortable with the offensive line if that was the case. In terms of the CB2, obviously Deonte Banks' development is also very important. However, I would say the offensive line, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, is slightly more of a concern than the defense or the secondary, because of all the additions the Giants made in the secondary over the last, let's call it 16 months, between drafting Tyler Nubin and Drew Phillips last year and then signing Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland this year. And not only that, but Cordell Flot's looked good this summer as well and looked good in the spring. They got listed on the first unofficial depth chart as both being that second starting corner. So, and I would say, despite that listing, I still think Deonte Banks is probably the slight favorite to win the starting job come week 1. So in terms of which one would be more beneficial long-term, I think for a variety of reasons, it's got to be Evan Neal winning that starting right guard spot.
See, it's interesting. I'd go the opposite way, Matt.
Really?
Yeah, I'd go with Deonte Banks. And I guess the reason being is Neal is on the final year of his deal, because they didn't pick up the option. So I think the Giants are of the mindset, there's a possibility we may move on from him after this year. That's not to say that you don't want him to do well, but that realization has settled in. Banks, 2023 first-round pick, still have to decide whether or not you want to pick up the fifth-year option. There's a lot more riding, I guess is what I'm saying, on Deonte Banks and his development. And while Flott is there as another option, if you look at the rest of the depth chart, see, I would argue, I think the Giants at least are prepared for life without Evan Neal based on some roster moves, and they've got Greg Van Roden and some other guys that they have recently drafted. If Banks doesn't get to the level that they want, and remember, Flott was drafted the year before and wasn't a first-round pick. Yeah, so that's another deal that is going to soon be expiring. You look at the depth chart at corner. I'm not talking about safety, because I think you were referring to the changes they made at safety are very encouraging, but there's a lot of unknown at that position if you don't get what you need out of Banks, which means you may have to go back into the well of the draft. So I think the more and more I evaluate it, I'd actually go more towards Banks to answer the YouTube question, that could be more beneficial as opposed to what happens with Evan Neal if he can run away with this right guard job.
I guess the way that I'm thinking about it is just that I feel like the rest of the defense could easily not only get by, but still thrive, even if whoever is playing that second outside corner spot played, let's just call it subpar. Even if that spot gave you subpar production all year, you could still have an elite defense. If Evan Neal, though, were to beat out Greg Van Roden come week 1, that would have to mean that he looks so good in the summer that the coaching staff said, we can't leave this guy on the bench at guard. And in which case, that is going to very much elevate the upside of the offensive line as a whole. And I think we can all agree that going into the year, the biggest question mark probably is still the offensive line, especially with Andrew Thomas not being back right now. If you could get a boost up front on the offensive line, I think that would go a lot further than, maybe like a slight boost at that second corner spot. This is the way I think about it.
No, and there's multiple ways to look at it.
The growth of both of those guys, if both of them could end up winning the starting spots at their respective positions, the Giants would be in very good shape.
Well, because especially a guy like Neal, who they did not exercise the 5th year, so now all of a sudden, you're getting some value later on in his rookie contract, and Flott and Banks still in the developmental phase, but Banks has even been on the record saying he felt it was a sophomore slump last year. So right there, he's setting the expectations high that he expects a bounce back. And it's interesting you viewing it from the standpoint of elevating the offensive line, because the spin the opposite way would be, but if Neal does win the job, now you're lacking continuity on the right side, meaning Illuminor's got to learn to play next to a new guy, and now John Michael Schmidt. So, does that then maybe balance out what you think he could do to elevate it?
That's fair.
And then the other way that I look at it is, even though maybe others can help if you get subpar play from the other cornerback position, Matt, as we've seen in the NFL, you get a veteran quarterback, he sees a corner struggling, they'll pick on you all day long. And unless you have somebody else who's holding his hand, it's hard to cover up. I guess it's hard on the boundary. When you're a boundary corner, there's only so much that you could do to help out that guy. See, the guy in the slot, maybe you could help. You bring the linebacker up, you move guys around. You're on an island out on the boundary. If you struggle, I guess I'm a little skeptical of how much more the other 10 guys can put the duct tape out there and patch it up. So that's just my perspective.
At least in terms of the first part about the continuity, I agree with you. Obviously, I literally just said before how important continuity is, which is why if Evan Neal were to win that starting guard spot, he would have had to have played so well in the preseason that the coaching staff would be willing to overlook the continuity aspect in order to put him in.
Yeah, because the upside of playing him is more than perhaps the continuity.
Yeah,
that's
so
fair.
If he looks that good, obviously I think that would be a big boost to the offensive line overall. And I get what you're saying about the second the CB2 spot. I guess I feel so confident about the pass rush this year, the defensive front, where I think that those guys up front will be able to make up for any sort of deficiencies the Giants have in the secondary. Not that I think that there will be deficiencies, because I do think the secondary is being, very much overlooked, considering the talent they now have at what could be all 5 starting spots in the secondary. But I just think the pass rush is going to give opposing offenses and offensive lines and quarterbacks so much trouble that quarterbacks are going to be looking to get rid of the ball so quickly, and obviously that is just going to be a big boost to the secondary, regardless of who's back there.
Let's open up the phone lines as we move forward here on Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Len is in Maryland, and he joins us on BBKL. What's happening, Len?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Doing all right.
Good.
What's on your mind?
You, Len?
All right, man. I'm getting excited. Here we go. 19 of the next 20 weeks will be a Giants football game.
There you go.
Wow. Maybe more. Hey, if we make the playoffs, maybe even more weeks.
Let's hope. Fingers crossed.
But it's going to be fun. It's been a long wait. Well, I'll try to stay with your question, but I had a couple other things to add. I'm looking at Dart. I want to see Abdul. I'm going to be watching Neal closely. I think you guys are right on. Oh, he's got to win that job. He just has to win that job. That is a major setback if Evan doesn't take that job. Let me throw something out to you here. You're gonna jump on me, but I really feel this. If Neal can't win that job, cut him.
For what reason,
give me a thought.
Well,
he can't start. He failed at tackle. He's now failed at guard.
I'll disagree.
He can't play.
Okay, well, to answer your first question or statement in response, I'll say I disagree with your sentiment, Len, that it's a huge disappointment if he doesn't win the starting job. As Matt and I just went through, even though he has experience playing guard, he hasn't played guard since college. So he's going back to a position that he has no NFL experience at, and his competition is a seasoned vet who has a whole lot more experience there and has moved around on the interior of the line. So Greg Van Roten, by default, has a significant edge over Evan Neal, regardless of where Neal was drafted. So I don't think it would be viewed as a disappointment.
And also, just real quick, Len, just from a salary perspective, cutting Evan Neal now would just be taking what's nearly $8 million and just basically lighting it on fire, because his rookie contract, the first 4 years, are fully guaranteed. So that would just be wasting money to have a guy who, at the very least, could be your backup guard.
Okay, I want to move on from that,
too.
but let me.
Yeah.
If you'll give me the last word, I'd appreciate it on the Evan Neal thing. We gain nothing by keeping Evan Neal as a backup. Keep Kubas. Matt, the rookie from Youngstown State, Williams. Keep an eye on him. He's a good player. He should have been drafted. We got young depth there. I want him to win that job. I'm not a big Van Roten fan. This is it for Van Roten. You think Van Roten's coming back next year? You think Illumino's coming back next year? You think if Thomas has got to be healthy? I mean, we got to find some people who can play, not back up. We got to find some people who can play. If Evan can't win that job, play Kubas. Get him in there. I don't want to. God bless him. He gave us 17 games. He's a tough guy. Thank you very much, Greg Van Roten. I really appreciate it. But give me Kubas at that guard position if Neal can't beat him out. All right, can I move on to what?
Yeah, I mean, just real before I let you move on, the only thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
The only thing that I would add is I think you have to look at it from the standpoint. There's a reason they brought back Greg Van Roten. The Giants didn't have to do that, right? I mean, they could have said, Jay Kubas, okay, it's your job to compete with Evan Neal.
Okay.
So the fact that they're bringing back Van Roten means they look at him as valuable, and they also know that, remember, Greg Van Roten could very well be the backup center to John Michael Schmitz, which means you need depth. You need depth at right guard. You can't throw away a guy like Evan Neal.
But let me tell you a kind of another idea that I have, and I say this once a year for about the last 10 or 12 years. So you guys, you guys are the recipient of my making this statement for the first time this year, and probably the only time this year. I am not a big fan of former starters on our team becoming backups on our team the next year. You've told the guy he can't play that position. What I'm telling you is I know about the center thing, and that's a compelling reason to hang on to Van Roten if he doesn't win the guard thing. But you know what? If we had somebody else who could play center, I'd cut Van Roten if he couldn't start. I don't like former starters being backups. But it doesn't work in the world of work.
It's not like Van Roten would be a backup because he looks so awful this summer. It would just be because Evan Neal at this new position reclaims some of that pre-draft buzz that made him a top 7 pick in just a couple of years ago. It would be more Evan Neal winning the job than Greg Van Roten losing it, because let's not forget, Van Roten was by far and away the most consistent and solid offensive lineman the Giants had last year. He played every single snap despite being by far the oldest man in that room. So I don't think it's fair just to kind of poo-poo him.
And Len, I know you want to make another point, but real quick here, Van Roten entered the league in 2012. He even pointed this out in a recent interview. He did not start until 2018 when he was 28 years old. Do you really think a guy that has preached that much patience is going to all of a sudden at this stage in his career at 35 get worried whether or not he has to go back to being a backup when he had to grind it out to become a starter? I think that statement is too dangerous to hold it as a generic comment over everybody. I think it varies player to player.
And we also talk about how important depth is on the offensive.
If I was the general manager, that would be my rule of thumb.
Len,
it's a dangerous rule of thumb, Len. That's what I'm saying.
But Len, we talk about how important the depth on the offensive line is. I don't even know how many times we've spoken about that matter. Greg Van Roten is a proven veteran that's here on a very reasonable 1-year contract. Even if he doesn't win the starting guard spot, why would you not want to keep him as your primary backup for all 3 spots on the interior?
Well, you just said it. We don't really have a backup center unless you think Schlottman. Schlottman's an interesting guy. We signed Schlottman to a 2-year contract. We must have thought something of that guy.
Yeah, he missed
got a longer contract than Van Roten got.
He broke his leg and missed most of last year.
Yeah.
Now he's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, and he plays center. He plays center too. Okay, look, thank you for tolerating that idea for me. But and let me just, if I may, just one final thing on that, and it'll be quick. Win the job, Evan. Win the job. We'll be a better football team with you at guard. If you win that job, then we will with Van Roten. Okay, thank you. Hey, what I'm looking for tomorrow, and I'd like your response to this. I'm looking for 2 things. I'm looking for physicality, and I'm looking for discipline. I don't want to see any offsides penalties, illegal motions, personal fouls, time expired before we can get the playoff. I want this team to look a little organized tomorrow night. I don't want those kinds of penalties. I don't care if it's just the first game.
Yeah, I don't think that's a crazy expectation.
Get the discipline in there. Yeah. Secondly, and then you can comment or take me off the phone, whatever you think is the right thing to do. I want to see a degree of physicality tomorrow night. I want to see these guys run to the ball and be a little physical. I know this goes with the team. I get to watch a lot of Ravens games down here because I'm in the area. I mean, I'm 20 minutes away from the stadium. I'm watching the Ravens last night. Oh, God, even their fourth stringers are throwing their bodies around. I mean, it's football. I want to see it. I don't want to get pushed around. I want to see a degree of physicality. Hey, thanks for taking my call, guys. I hope you can comment on what I just said.
Yeah, we will.
Thank you very much.
You got to appreciate the phone call.
Thanks, Len.
Yeah, you don't want to have mental mistakes. You don't want to have penalties. Dabes gets annoyed when there's pre-snap penalties during practice. So I think that standard remains the same. In terms of the physicality, by nature, it's a physical game. If you're going out there now against a foreign opponent and you don't bring that physicality, that's going to be a problem if you hope to make the team. So I think all of the things that Len threw out is not a stretch, but I guess I would put them under the umbrella, Matt. They're expected. That's what you want to see out of everybody, not just offensive linemen, not just defensive linemen. If a running back gets to the second level, you want to see him stiff arm the linebacker so that maybe he gets additional yardage. That physicality can be the difference between winning and losing a few extra games over the course of the season.
100%. And I feel like this, sort of storyline kind of has been forgotten just because it's been months and, spring practice is no contact. There's no hitting in training camp. But around the free agency and especially right after the draft, the type of players that the Giants brought in this offseason was a very hot topic. I hope you guys all remember this because the Giants brought in guys that are very physical. You look at the draft class, and I said this right after the draft, every single member of that draft class, just about every single one, has got just like a little bit of, I don't know what you want to call it, a little bit of like crazy to them in a good way. And a lot of the free agents they brought in as well have that same sort of very physical mindset. I mean, we all saw what Cam Scadaboo did at Arizona State last year, running people over. Thomas Fidone tattooed himself. It is an extremely painful thing to do. And you go on through everyone on the list. They're all, have a mindset of wanting to go out there and just sort of, hit the other team in the mouth. And that goes for a lot of the veterans that were brought in free agency too. This was a topic that we discussed a lot earlier in the offseason that I feel like we kind of just have glossed over the last few months because there hasn't been any hitting in contact. But in terms of the physicality aspect, that is not something I'm concerned about tomorrow. Regardless of which guys play and who doesn't, I don't think we're going to have to be too worried about the physical part. I think that will, be quite evident and obvious on the tape tomorrow. And just real quick, just to put a bow tie, Len calls all the time. I could not disagree more about the Greg Van Roten take.
Oh, sure. Well, that's why I voiced that too. Yeah.
I mean, depth on the offensive line, I can't even count how many times we've spoken about how important that is. And even if Evan Neal wins the starting spot, why would you not want to have just a proven, solid veteran that can back up all three spots on the interior that if he gets called upon, you can rely on him and there's not going to be like a hiccup on the offensive line. They're going to just pick up as if no one ever, missed a step. So I could not disagree more with that take.
And actually, you know what? I just thought of something in-house that maybe goes counter to what he was campaigning for. Look at Darius Slayton's career. He went from being the guy, right, to being on the bubble, to maybe not having a renewal contract, and then all of a sudden rising back to the occasion. Under Len's philosophy, they should have cut Darius Slayton a few years back and not even given him a chance to maybe resurrect his career. So you don't even have to look beyond the organization for an example of how it depends on the mindset of the player. I would not hold that true for everybody in the National Football League. On the topic of physicality, I want to get to another YouTube question or two before we wrap up shop here. Brett writes the following. In regard to the running backs for the season, I think they should use Tracy and Scadaboo similar to how the Lions use Gibbs and Montgomery. Now, just for our audience to understand, 2 years ago, Montgomery 219 carries, Gibbs 182. Last year, there were some injuries. Montgomery got hurt later in the year, but still, they were available for the bulk of the games. The breakdown a year ago, Gibbs went to 250, Montgomery 185. So the numbers were fairly even in the same ballpark for the first 2 years. But here's the difference. When you say you want the Giants to utilize those two, like Gibbs and Montgomery, you can't overlook Devin Singletary, okay? So the Giants really have three players, whereas the Lions didn't have a true third consistent option that they looked to work in. Craig Reynolds got work when one of the two got hurt in Detroit. So I don't expect the numbers as a result of that, Matt, to play out just like Detroit. But if you want to look at usage, there were times, but this has also flip-flopped in the first 2 years, where Gibbs would be middle-of-the-field guy because of his elusiveness, and then they bring in Montgomery as the goal line back. I think Tracy and Scadaboo can both handle themselves in either one of those roles, especially since Scadaboo can catch the ball in the backfield. Why would you want to then just reserve him as a goal line back or a short yardage back? I think you'd be eating into his potential production. So I think they'll utilize both, but I wouldn't sleep on clearly Singletary's presence and him being in the thick of things as well.
Yeah, I mean, Coach Dable has spoken about Devin Singletary, and he clearly loves him. There is a reason why they brought him here last offseason, why he's still on the team. He is going to get on the field somewhat. I do think that, assuming all three are healthy, Tracy and Scadaboo will probably get more touches than Singletary, but Singletary is not just going to completely disappear from this offense. It's just not going to happen. And in terms of, the roles and using them like Gibbs and Montgomery, both Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scadaboo, along with Brian Dable, have spoken about how those two backs, all three of those backs, but if we're focused on those two, they're all capable of doing everything you need a running back to do. They can run, they can catch, they can block. For that reason, I don't think they're going to have set, defined roles. I think the offense, or Kafka and Dable, are going to just sort of sub those guys in and out to keep them fresh. Put one in for a couple of plays, take him out, put the other one in. I don't think there's going to be sort of set, defined roles for them, kind of like what we saw more in Detroit with Gibbs and Montgomery, because especially Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scadaboo are not only more than capable of doing everything you need a running back to do, but can excel at everything you need a running back to do.
Well, that's why every time Dabes has been asked specifically, I've always picked up on this, Matt. They're always trying to pry the usage or the knowledge of the running backs, and he says, hey, Singletary's been in my system for years, because people forget he was in Buffalo with Dabes.
Yep.
So the one running back that they know is like a rock, they can rely on him, they know exactly what they're going to get out of him, is Singletary. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to move to the top of the depth chart, but I would be very taken back and surprised if he dissipates and is completely removed from the rotation. So his presence is going to make it very difficult, to circle back to our question, for the Giants to duplicate the 1-2 punch that the Lions have. It's going to be more of a 2-1 ratio, meaning I could see Scadaboo and Tracy getting more work than Singletary, but Singletary is going to find his ways to contribute. And remember, a lot, at least in the early stages of the season, is going to depend on Scadaboo's health and how quickly he can get on the field before week 1.
I was just about to say that. Cam Scadaboo, obviously, going back to the spring, has not been 100% healthy. He's kind of been in and out of practice. He's also a rookie. And, while we have seen rookie running backs step in on day one and have success, a lot of rookie running backs take a little bit of time to just get accustomed to the speed and sort of physicality of the NFL. Now, I'm not really worried about the physicality part with Cam Scadaboo, because I think whenever he does get out on the field, it's not going to be long before we see him running over defenders in the NFL. But they don't want to rush him out there from a health perspective and from, a mental, being ready to mentally handle the NFL aspect of it as well. So especially to start the season, we're going to see Devin Singletary out there. I do think Tracy will lead the backfield in touches, probably for the season, unless Scadaboo comes in at some point and lights the league on fire. But again, all three of those guys are going to get the ball this season.
Especially with the trajectory of what Tracy did in the second half of the season last year.
Oh, yeah.
I would think that he'd be leading the pack but Scadaboo's versatility makes him extremely attractive that you definitely want to tap into that even over the course of the first season. Reminder before we close up shop here with another impactful draft and free agency class in the books. That means it's full steam ahead to the 2025 season. You can take your fandom to the next level with a Giants season ticket membership and catch all the action at MetLife Stadium with an exciting home schedule on the horizon. With a membership, you'll also stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days, with exclusive member access and benefits. To learn more about a New York Giants season ticket membership, visit Giants.com/tickets. So we now look ahead to tomorrow's preseason game, a 1 p.m. Eastern kickoff between the Giants and the Bills. We'll be back, of course, on Monday to recap it all as we move into the joint sessions between the Giants and the Jets. So a lot to look forward to as we get into the heart of August. Big Blue Kickoff Live presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. The archive of this show, our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast as we are broadcasting from the Giants podcast studio presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. For Matt Citak, I'm Lance Medow signing off here on Friday's edition of BBKL. Enjoy the weekend. We'll speak to you on Monday. Have a good one.